Welcome to the Spawn Chunks, episode number 139 for Monday, May 3rd, 2021. My name is Johnny, but the internet knows me as Pixel Riffs, and joining me, as always, is an oxidized Joel Duggan. Hi, Joel.
Yeah, that's what happens when you get older. Speaking of oxidation and things that are happening in the outside, and especially in, say, someone's backyard, if you'd like to hear more about that, about Avatar: The Last Airbender, about OBS settings and D&D, check out the Render Distance. It's the extended version of the podcast. You can find that at patreon.com/thespawnchunks, and that's where you can go to support the podcast. And it's the top of the month. We wanted to say a big shout out and thank you to everyone that's been joining the growing community over the last few weeks. We really appreciate the support. You are the reason that we can keep doing this show, and it is a lot of fun to have you in the Discord, as well as enjoying features, things like the Chunk Mail Dispenser, the quarterly Hangouts, and the live Discord recording broadcast that we do with our patrons. So thank you so much for the support.
One of my favorite things about our Discord community is that they do what we do every week and talk about what we've been doing in our Minecraft lives. You know, you'll jump into the Spawn Town chat and there's always somebody having a discussion about, like, what's next for their town or their kind of build projects, what redstone farms they're making, and we have a bunch of different dedicated chats for those. But it's always great to get a snapshot of what we're all doing in Minecraft lately, and we have a lively discussion about the contents of the show as well. So it's a great place to be. Speaking of which, Joel, what have you been up to in Minecraft this week?
So I spent a little bit of time on the Citadel. I really divided my time between the Citadel and the Snapshot this week. And the Citadel has entered into one of those chill phases where there's a lot of road planning, river dredging, and just kind of like doing sections of things that are required before I can spend another couple of streams building. It's a lot easier to build houses and kind of like come up with unique shapes and try to puzzle solve when you already have those roads kind of embedded and ready to go. So that's what I spent, the time on the Citadel doing this week, was planning the roads in the, I don't know what you want to call it. It's like a river settlement that's outside the town. It's the kind of people that would live next to the town, might run inside the town if there was ever any big trouble, like a battle. But for the most of their lives, they live outside the town because they are fishermen or whatever. They want to live by the river. And so I did a lot of that. I did a lot of smooth and streamlining of the river and whatnot. But I'm realizing, and even just taking screenshots to share with listeners this week, that I might have gone overboard in removing all of the sand and all of the gravel from the river, only to probably have to add some back in so it doesn't look quite so plain. And so I want to try and, as I river sculpt the rest of the area, I kind of want to make a note to dial back on the removal of so much stuff. I'm not a big fan of sand in rivers, but I maybe need to replace it with gravel and then let Minecraft, terrain generation dictate, hey, look, you should put a gravel deposit here just because there's sand here right now, but it's going to look better if it's not all just brown dirt underneath the water surface. Now, I do have a plan to go through with some bone meal, which is a lovely addition with, I think, the update Aquatic in 1.13, where you can get seagrass and stuff to grow in the rivers, which adds a lot of life with the movement and sway of plant life and stuff in the river. So I'll be doing that as well.
Yeah, rivers are kind of tricky to get right from a real world kind of realism perspective, because a lot of the time when you look at rivers in photography or, and anywhere that we are likely to encounter rivers more frequently, there's a lot of reflections in the water, or there's a lot of activity in the water if it's a faster flowing river. And you don't tend to see a whole lot of what's on the bottom of a river. You maybe see like a little bit of the banks, but then a lot of it is, the light refracts and it gets deeper and darker towards the bottom of the river, and you don't really tend to see as much. Whereas in Minecraft, the transparency of the natural water texture, the default water, in Java Edition in particular, tends to feel very transparent now. And it's changed over the years with the texture updates and so forth, and, giving more visibility underwater from the update Aquatic onwards. But when you just have one texture underwater, it really shows. And despite Minecraft's natural river generation leaving just kind of blobs of material, it doesn't necessarily feel geologically correct. It's not super sculpted that way. It still provides enough variety that you miss that when all you've got is something like dirt. And even throwing in some stuff like soul soil and things, now we have access to them, is not a bad idea, just to vary up some of the textures. If you want the river to feel kind of brown and silty, you've got those and mushroom blocks. And I used to do it with soul sand, but then they added the update aquatic functionality to that, and we ended up with bubbles everywhere. So yeah, it's interesting just shaping the ecology of a river to feel a little bit more natural while working with the restrictions that Minecraft brings.
I'm the same way. I had designed a couple of river and even a little waterfall in early on in Dartmouth Meadows, and it's now Bubble City Fish Murder Town because of all the soul sand. But replacing it with soul soil is a good alternative. And in some ways, you can use bubbles to your advantage. If you want to have bubbles at the bottom of a waterfall, you can actually put in some soul sand on purpose and have some activity there. But I'm realizing that most of my experience with looking at rivers isn't really looking at rivers. I see streams a lot in some of the parks that I go to around the city. And I mean, they're barely a meter wide.
Yeah.
So they're maybe a foot deep. So you can clearly see the bottom, and there's grass and plants and rocks and stuff like that. So you get that in your brain, but then you realize that in Minecraft, you're dealing with something that's, 4 to 5 meters deep. It's 6 meters across, so it's a little bit harder to kind of sort out.
The scale of it is really weird to work out, because like a meter wide river might be something that, you have to really think about jumping across in the real world, whereas a meter wide river in Minecraft is a water source,
Yeah.
And so you end up with difficulties of player scale in that respect, and to really have that feel of like every river in Minecraft that generates naturally feels like the size of thing that would be a rushing river throughout most of what I know of rivers in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, in this particular use in my town, it works because it's meant to be kind of like a blockade, something that you would not typically want to try to walk across. Like you'd be over your head and wet, which would be bad. You'd much prefer to take the bridge, and then the bridge can be guarded or whatever. Just they act as more of a barrier. I still try not to make them more than 3 blocks deep, because after that, any kind of like fun design you're going to do in them, you can't see anyway. But I know what you mean about soul soil. I like using mushroom block as well. Kind of looks like silt, at the bottom of a river.
Yeah,
it's always
definitely
a lot of fun. The other thing that I added was another angled arch across the river. I had put the towers in, and I had planned for this potentially earlier on, and it was a good idea. I wasn't sure if I was going to do it, and then I changed the way that I built walls, and things changed. So instead of having a nice even 15 blocks across, I had to change it and do 2 sections of 4 and 1 section of 7, just to try to like make things work. And then I did another arch on an angle, which I'm finding are easier to do on even numbers. I don't know why that is, but it seems to be the way to go. I did run into some snags, just kind of like Minecraft hitting its limits on what an angled build could be, and how to make it look relatively smooth, even though you're dealing with 1 meter changes horizontally. And it was challenging, but it came to the point of just maybe letting go on the backside and saying, okay, well, a wall sort of softens it a little bit, but it doesn't really go all the way, and I can't really go much farther than this. But it was a lot of fun to have something done again on the Citadel in not even a stream, but like a half a stream, because the other half of the stream, I actually hit the Snapshot twice this week, and have been now getting into some 117 goodies, which is nice. Found a shipwreck encased in an iceberg. Found some good iron and tools and things, but nothing of 117 variety. But it was a fun, adventure. So far, we've collected copper, deep slate, raw ores, and now dripstone. And I was going to take a picture of the naturally generated dripstone. A little blob occurred in a cave that we found exploring the Snapshot yesterday on stream. But as I was getting ready to do that, mobs were just pouring out of whatever dark caves were nearby, including a creeper, which helped me mine the dripstone, but robbed my ability to take a screenshot of the very pretty dripstone.
Dang it, creepers. Yeah, no, they'll do that, unfortunately. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Taking screenshots of this game on the fly proves increasingly difficult when you're also dealing with mob activity. So
yeah,
that's rough.
Yeah. And I mean, in hindsight, before I tried it, I should have run around with some torches out of shot and just like lit up the whole area, but whatever. It did end up being kind of a frustrating end to the stream. We were trying to get to the point where we could do some enchanting, because I'm starting to find a lot of copper. When I find iron, I don't have an iron farm, so I'm trying to take advantage of the new drop rates with the raw ores, and I want to enchant the pickaxes and see if I can't get a fortune pick, because I do have a couple of diamond pickaxes. My first death on the server, which is actually, I was impressed. So this is like the 4th stream. So we're talking 12 hours of pretty solid gameplay, which includes a lot of dark mining. Hadn't died. I was leaving my chamber with the bed, and a baby husk was coming at me. And I took a swipe at him, because as you would do that. The iron golem next to him took the hit along with the baby zombie and ended me in one shot. And so I was like, okay, great. So that is why I don't play hardcore. Like, if that was a hardcore world, I would. It was a disappointing thing on stream, but I would have been done. Like, if that was hardcore, I would have been just like, well, that's the end of the stream today, folks. Have a nice day. Gotta go bye. Like, I was not impressed because we were just about to enchant with the 32 levels that I had,
of course,
which I lost. So I haven't quite got to the point where we can do the enchanting things. And I am not the fastest Minecraft player. I'm not doing a speed run. I'm definitely distracted by a number of things in the playthrough. So this is not to say that it takes you 12 plus hours to get to, enchanting. You could get there way faster if you knew what you were doing. But so far the impressions are that it feels like a lot of the stuff is gated behind discovery. Like, you're getting copper right away, but we've not found a geode. It took us a long time to find dripstone. I wasn't trading a lot with villagers, but I also didn't have a good source of emeralds either. So it's curious to see like where this 117 content lands in the new release when it comes out. Like, where in gameplay does it start to come up? Copper is going to be the first thing you find, but after that, you're kind of like at the whim of just like discovering things in the world.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting one because this is clearly a compromise, right? Like, it's nice to have multiple ways of getting something, and eventually the plan is, of course, to have lush caves and dripstone caves where you can get these things in abundance. But in order to not make those features redundant by giving you a lot of access to them, they've had to cut back on the amount of ways you can get it in the meantime. And that means that, you have to find a wandering trader or a shipwreck or something before you can get some of the more rare stuff. And then it entirely becomes, effectively RNG figuring out whether or not you're getting some of the newer features, which, I mean, gives you something to go out and look for, of course, but is also perhaps a little frustrating when all you want to do is build. Yeah.
I did find and harvest some of the dripstone. So the idea being the next stream, we're going to try to build some sort of very simple mob spawner, farm, something we can either change the path that they go to be either auto drop collection with dripstone being the spikes that they fall on, or manually killing them and getting the XP to get ourselves back up to enchant some stuff quickly. I'm hoping that with maybe an adventure through a ravine that might lead to a mine shaft or something, that will eventually find a geode, because if I'm going to do a mob spawner, I'd really like to use some tinted glass and explore those mechanics just to kind of see if it makes a big difference, if it's something cool, if it's hard to make, like, is it something that's really tedious, or is it just worth the little window that you might need to see how things are going? So anyway, well, I'll see how it goes, but that's essentially the plan going in next time. A little bit I'm hitting that point in Minecraft now where you're going to have to put in some grind for an infrastructure in order for the rest of the gameplay to feel a little bit smoother. But
yeah, definitely. You get to that point fairly early in a world once you know what you're doing, and once the kind of the urge to explore a new Minecraft world, you kind of think, I've seen a few of these at this point. Let me hunker down and actually get the resources for a build or two first.
What have you been up to?
So, I started out channeling my thoughts about copper, which have been percolating for a while, into a video about the latest Snapshot, because of them making changes to ore veins and stuff, which we're going to discuss a little bit later in the news. But I found that my thoughts on copper have really been shaped a lot by listener emails and discussions in our Discord, which is one of the advantages, I think, of doing this show every week, is that, fresh ideas come from the community, things that I hadn't considered. And I made a video about copper, and we're probably going to discuss copper a little bit more later, but I honestly think copper is one of those things that's going to evolve a lot in future, and a bunch of different uses are going to spring up. And also, something we've discussed an episode or two ago on the show was that a lot of modded players rely on copper as a resource that goes into a lot of tech mods, but then there was never a universal vanilla copper that everyone was using. So I think it's kind of cool that copper is now potentially going to work for that in future. And there are compromises that they've made in the meantime, but I wanted to point out to people who might be more familiar with vanilla and hadn't really been aware of that copper meant something to the modded community as well. I didn't do much else in the snapshot with the data pack because I was running into that lag and freezing kind of lag spike issue more often than not at this point. It seems to have gotten progressively worse as the snapshots roll on, and I don't know if that's just anecdotal or if that's actually the case, but I found that frustrating enough to not really want to go into the snapshot too much because I'm either, logging out and logging back in to see if that makes any difference, or just churning through worlds to get one that works for about half an hour before the lag spikes start to kick in. So I haven't really been doing all that much in the snapshots, and honestly, I'm fine leaving the 1.17 regular snapshots, the ones that are going to be for the summer update. I'm fine leaving those alone for now because I kind of want to get a bit of distance between myself and the update now, just so I don't get too focused on everything. And so instead, I have rejoined the crew from Don't Die December, who reformed for another hardcore server running throughout May. The exact name of it was kind of under contention for a while. I think it is now called Don't Die 2 because it is no longer December, but Mount My May was one of the alternatives that was proposed. I personally thought it would be really funny to call it We May Die, but either way, it ended up being a fun enough group that we added a few people to it and decided to launch another month-long hardcore project where on the first night several of us died, but we decided that because it was early days and basically we just want to be all in the same room having fun together, like we didn't want to necessarily have the hardcore stuff be as strict as it had been previously. And we spawned next to a dark oak forest, so there was a lot of mobs just kind of coming out of the trees during daytime. A few people got a mulligan. we ended up dying in unfortunate ways a couple of times. At least one person has now already kicked it for real on day 3 of the server, but yeah, it's a fun group, and it's nice to have a bunch of people to hang out with on a casual server that I feel like just kind of popping into and playing and not really doing too much content from. The main project on that, though, has been defying the dragon, because we decided that we're not going to do a group dragon fight until Thursday this week, so a few days from now. But when people mentioned that in the Discord, I said, is there any problem with us going to the end and not killing the dragon, but still trying to bridge out to the islands and start to explore that way? And they said, well, no, but you're not going to be able to return to the overworld, because if you throw all of your stuff in an ender chest and drop into the void, you die, and that's it. But I decided that Zloy XP, who I do the Hermitcraft recap with, and I were both going to gear up and rush the end, and then stay in the outer islands for a few days until the group got together for a dragon fight, and do some builds with purple and end stone and whatever we could bring with us. So that has now evolved into us basically playing Skyblock in the end islands, which is really quite fun.
That would be a really cool way to play, especially on a multiplayer server where if you just want to avoid the dragon, but eventually you do want to have the ability to use that exit portal or come back, then like that, obviously having other people to kill the dragon for you would be a boon in that way.
Yeah.
I kind of wish that there was more of a gameplay mechanic like that in Minecraft. Like you had to do that to get to the dragon. Like imagine if instead of spawning in and immediately fighting the dragon, you spawned in the reverse location. Like you spawned in the end islands, maybe without access to shulker boxes and stuff. And then you had to travel to and get the resources built up to get to the end island and fight fight the dragon.
Yeah, and then that was still the only way you could get back to the overworld. And
Yeah.
I think there's some interesting stuff you could put into a game mode of sorts that way. But we brought enough stuff with us that we can harvest trees. We brought enough like spruce and dark oak saplings that we're getting the larger types of trees. We're turning those into charcoal and using that to pop chorus fruit for building blocks. I brought some lava and water with me, so we have a cobblestone generator, which we then decorated. And we've started building a kind of, weird, almost like retro future metropolis based on Jack Kirby comics and the architecture of a guy I mentioned on the show ages ago, Freddie Mamani Silvestre, who's like a Bolivian architect who does these really kind of interesting, almost like the design of old Bakelite radios taken to like architectural extremes. And yeah, we've got some fun ideas for builds out there. The highlight really was realizing that if we wanted to, having raided a couple of end cities and got some enchanted gear, but not like a huge amount of stuff, I realized that if we wanted to, we could fish out there and see if we could get some enchanted books and stuff that way. And we brought enough iron for an anvil so that we could combine stuff. But I hadn't brought any string, so we didn't have the materials for fishing rods, and with the end being the landscape that it is, there's no real way of getting string out there. So this morning, I helped a couple of friends record a segment where they came to the end portal and threw stuff through, but didn't come through themselves. So they just dumped a load of string and eggs and stuff into the end portal. And then I used an end gateway from further out in the islands that transport you directly back to that obsidian platform. I used one of those to get back, grabbed everything that they had thrown through, and then ran away again. And so we still haven't fought the dragon, but we basically have a way of them giving us like supply drops and care packages. The only unfortunate thing is we can't send anything back yet, but we basically promised, okay, we're going to raid a few end cities, and anybody who's able to help us out with the resources that way, we can like earmark a couple of shulker boxes for you when we bring those back, or we've got a few sets of elytra at this point, and if we can get mending on them, then that means we can, repair them and have some elytra ready to give out to people once the dragon is done with. So it's actually been a really fun way of playing the game, and it sort of feels like a fun prospect for anybody else. Nobody else can mess with us either, which, is always the way with these multiplayer servers, pranks start up.
Right.
And with it being a hardcore server, the pranks can't be lethal, but they're at least kind of, some good-natured messing with each other. But then if anybody wants to prank us, they have to commit to living in the end with us until Thursday. And so when they came up to throw this stuff in the portal, I said to them, like, whatever you do, check your surroundings, make sure the silverfish spawner is broken, don't touch any blocks in the stronghold, because if something nudges you into that portal by mistake, you are moving in with us. It's effectively what you're doing. So yeah, it was great fun, and it's been really fun to participate in this server. There's a great bunch of people on there, and even though I'm playing it kind of casually, it's just nice as a kind of holiday home from the more intensive off-camera work I'm doing on the Survival Guide Museum right now.
It's the ability that you have yourself and people that you're playing with to reinvent the Minecraft experience. Like I would have never thought to go to the end and just be like, nope, no dragon, and just go live on the end islands. And I imagine a lot of that, obviously from your Skyblock play and your survival guide work, just knowing what to bring with you, cobblestone generator, great decoration, by the way.
Yeah, that's all Sloy. That's
yeah, I got that impression.
Give that man any chance to turn something into a skull, and he will. And so he was like, wouldn't it be funny? This we've got this kind of automated piston-powered cobblestone generator, just a basic design, and he was like, wouldn't it be funny if this looked like it was, being vomited out of something's face? And yeah, that's what happens anytime you're on a server with that man.
Yeah, no, it that kind of stuff I just find fun, and that's the kind of thing that I get caught up in themes and like the medieval town and making it look good, and then I forget like there's those experiences with temporary servers, with temporary setups, with different kind of gameplay styles. You can just do some really goofy fun stuff in Minecraft, whether it's building like giant mob heads or like there's a lot of things that I end up focusing on just because of like my perfectionism comes out and bites me in the butt sometimes. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of fun stuff that I just miss out on because I'm usually so big picture Joel when it comes to what I'm doing in Minecraft on the Citadel. And I'm hoping to expand that in the Snapshot play and maybe try to do some more like off kilter thing. I'm in a desert, and I've been thinking a lot about, like, even though I don't like the movie, Mad Max.
Yeah.
Like that kind of a aesthetic would be really cool to try to do some builds and stuff in the desert. But yeah, it's one of those things where I sometimes forget just how fun and like weird in a wonderful way that Minecraft can be when you just kind of like have all these different creative spoons in the pot, and there are, I guess we'll say, less inhibitions because everybody knows it's temporary. And before we move on, I want to ask, have you ever thought, or has the group ever thought about putting together a like a hardcore world, but instead of being one death, maybe it's 3? Didn't like Whip and those folks do a server like that last year or the year before?
Grian and a bunch of folks from Hermitcraft and a few other people from elsewhere are doing a server called Third Life right now that is like that, where your first 2 lives you are neutral to everybody and you can just kind of do the usual stuff, and on your third life your goal becomes hunting down other players, and it becomes more of like a battle royale kind of situation. But that's in hardcore once you've hit life number 3, basically. So three and you're out kind of thing. And so, like it's a fun idea. I really prefer cooperative gameplay in general, so if a PvP element was more involved, then I'd probably be against the idea of joining it. But I just like the idea of doing something cooperative. Hardcore kind of ties in with me with the fact that it's only a month-long server anyway, and so, you know, if people die early, then they don't miss out on more than a few weeks worth of content, and if, you know, everybody lasts until the end, then the server's going away sooner or later anyway, so you can take more risks as it goes on. And I feel like going out to the end was a big risk in itself, but it was just really really a fun way of exploring it. And yeah, maybe there might be a few things that trip me up and a few things that I would have preferred to have done by the time it's all over, but in the meantime it's nice to hop in and do whatever we want. I have left an image of Freddie Mamani's architecture, which maybe we can put in the show notes as well as the kind of inspiration for what we're going to be building. I'll try and grab a couple of shots of what we've built so far, because it's definitely a style I want to try out with more, and I'm planning on having somebody else drop through some Warped and Crimson Nylium and Fungus so that we can start making a tree farm out there for red and turquoise materials that we can use to augment the color palette of Endstone and Purple that we have right now.
Nice, yeah. I do recognize, if not this image, certainly the work of Mamani's stuff. I know you shared it with me before, but yeah, I'll definitely put that in the show notes.
Definitely. All right, let's move on to the news, though, because we have an extra snapshot this week, an extra bit of news besides. So let's get into it. Snapshot 21W17A was introduced. There'll be a link in the show notes to the snapshot changelog over on Minecraft.net, but this snapshot introduces tweaks to the raw ore textures, a few copper changes, and noodle caves in the Caves and Cliffs preview data pack. Changes in 21W17A include that small drip leaves can now be placed on moss blocks, copper ore now drops 2 or 3 raw copper when mined, or more when using a tool enchanted with fortune. Copper blocks are now crafted from 9 copper ingots, reverting it from the recipe that required only 4, and they've tweaked the texture of raw metal blocks. In the Caves and Cliffs preview data pack, large ore veins have been tweaked to be slightly rarer and slightly smaller, but still quite large. The ores in the vein are clumpier and less evenly distributed, and if you're lucky, you may even find a full raw ore block in one of these veins. They've also added noodle caves, which are a thinner, squigglier, and more claustrophobic variant of spaghetti caves. There is, of course, a long list of bug fixes as these get closer to a full release in summer, and the full list of bugs in 21W17A fixed are in the Minecraft.net article linked in our show notes.
A little bit of news coming in from Minecraft Dungeons. At Dungeons Game on Twitter has brought up the fact that on May 5th, cloud saves will be available. To quote that tweet, whether you want to play on the big screen or a handheld device of your trusty old laptop, the adventure doesn't have to stop. On May 5th, cloud saves are coming to Dungeons, meaning you'll be able to pick up and play your save game on any supported platform.
Which is good news for you, right? Because I think you were planning on dipping back into Dungeons, but you wanted your save file from PC so that you could play on Xbox.
100%. Yeah, I'm actually glad that I waited. I played a little bit, like I ran through Pumpkin Pastures, No, not Pumpkin Pastures. What's the Creeper Woods? Ran through Creeper Woods. I really enjoyed it. Like I just had fun, and it was like I stopped because it was like late one night, and I just didn't want to play too late in the evening. But I could feel that itch of like I would just keep going, but I thought, well, this is a waste of. I've already got to the point where I'm at the end boss fight. Like I would really like to try to continue that and explore the new content, which I have access to, because I've not done any of the expansions at all. And so this is really good news for me. I just haven't had the time to get back into it, but I have had the itch to play a dungeon crawler such that I downloaded and installed Torchlight 3 and Darksiders Genesis on the Xbox. I haven't yet played any of them because I was like, well, I want a dungeon crawler, but I don't want to play Minecraft Dungeons until Cloud Saves is available. So I actually uninstalled Torchlight because I went in to play it, and it was something about the sound design. It wasn't very good. But I've heard lots of good things about Darksiders Genesis. I'll probably leave that one installed and try that out later, but I will definitely be looking into Dungeons on the Xbox and testing out the Cloud Save thing, especially because as a subscriber to, see if I can get the whole title right, Xbox Game Pass Ultimate, I also have access to xCloud, which means that I may not only be able to have a cloud save, I might be able to do something like play dungeons on my iPad Pro. I don't know. I don't know if that's a supported device. I haven't looked into it yet, but there are abilities for me to try out some other games that my computer might not handle, or the device might not be able to play, and then test them out on those. So I'll include Minecraft Dungeons in that and see if I can't report back.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't played Dungeons for a little while, and I only played it on PC, so cloud saves won't really affect me all that much, but I think it's obviously great that they have a release plan for those this week, and it was kind of the one outstanding issue I saw people voicing online about Dungeons, the kind of thing that, you know, every time they'd announce a new DLC, you'd have a bunch of people replying saying, cloud saves when, you know? And I think beyond this point, if you're a fan of dungeon crawlers as a genre or Minecraft in general and you want a different gameplay experience, there's actually very little left to stop you enjoying Minecraft Dungeons immensely. Like, if it's not your thing, then I completely understand, but I think now that you have the opportunity to put down whatever you've been playing on the PC and then just pick it up again on the Switch if you want to travel or if you just feel like loafing on the couch instead of being at your PC at your desk, then I think, yeah, it makes Minecraft Dungeons more accessible to people, which is only a good thing.
And given your setup on the PC, depending on what you have, like, I mean, my giant television in 4K and the sound design in Minecraft Dungeons, it's a much better experience on the Xbox for me personally, because I'm using little Apple earpods and, you know, granted I have a nice monitor, but it's still a better experience. I find the kickback experience is much nicer. It took a little bit to get used to the controller because I'm definitely, all of my dungeon crawler experience, including Minecraft Dungeons, has been keyboard and mouse. And so to switch to the controller did take some adjusting, but now that I'm over there and I can do both, like I feel like it'll be a good switch. And this could be just coincidence, but my invite to the xCloud experience was only just last week. So I'm wondering if the Minecraft Dungeons cloud saves had something to do with the timing of the xCloud service being robust enough and tested enough that they felt that cloud saves would then be reliable enough to implement.
That's certainly a solid theory, I'd say, yeah, for sure. So you've been spending some time in the Snapshot. We're going to be talking a bit more about the potential of copper a little bit later on, but do you have any thoughts about this week's Snapshot?
So, like I mentioned briefly, I feel like a lot of the 117 stuff has just been gated behind discovery. Yeah. Right. Like it's been something that's been very, very hard to find. I feel like it's not necessarily end game. It's just that a lot of it just depends on like finding very specific blocks that then will unlock things. For example, you have to find a little patch of dripstone. Even if you only find one dripstone block, you now know at least you can put water sources above it and create dripstone to then mine yourself and harvest. So it's difficult in that way. To try and unlock that kind of stuff. The frustrating thing that I find in terms of trying to do content around the Snapshot is the lack of things like lush cave blocks and azalea trees. And if you want to do any kind of decorating or any kind of exploration of that stuff, like using moss to create mossy blocks instead of vines. Granted, I did find a swamp, but like it's one of those things where you want to explore the Snapshot, but you're just like, well, how do I even get to this kind of stuff? And I think part of the problem is that unlike the discovery that would happen in the cave generation 118, there's no what is the word I'm looking for? There's no, not stepping stones, but there's no landmarks along your gameplay experience in 117 right
Yeah,
now
it's
to
not
say
being like signposted like with
signposted.
yeah.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah. So you're just like, well, I want lush cave blocks. I know they're in the game. I read the patch notes, but like, how do I get them? The game doesn't tell you, right? So there's a lot of wiki stuff that you have to kind of look up, which it's fine. It's been part of Minecraft for a while, but so that kind of experience has not been the best. But when it comes to things like the changes of copper to be put back into the 9x9 grid, I appreciate it for storage. Like, it's nice to be able to compact what you have before you smelt it. If you need to compact it in your inventory when you're mining, like that did come in handy. Because as one would imagine, going from endgame to having no shulker boxes, you like the amount of times I've had to come back home, it has been a lot. I'm also not using bundles. Mainly because I don't want to kill bunny rabbits. I know it's weird, but it's just, it's not a good feeling. And the other thing is that a lot of what I'm collecting, I mean, a bundle would only hold 2 stacks of the things that are like piling up in my inventory. Like, I'm getting a lot of cobble. I'm getting a lot of deep slate. I'm getting a lot of, copper ore, which you can compact down into blocks, which is good. But like, a bundle only holds a stack. So unless you're doing like that top level immediate early game, like I have 2 flowers, 3 sticks, 1 sapling, like that stuff I find bundles useful for. But what I'm doing now is beyond that initial 3 to 4 hour dump into the game, and bundles I find are great immediately, but anything after that, it doesn't really help all that much.
Yeah, they're really not good for like long mining sessions and bulk storage. Like that's just not what they're designed for, and that's where shulker boxes would be really handy if you were that far along. And yeah, I think sooner or later we might get something to bridge that gap. But yeah, you're right. Bundles are really just for tidying stuff up, not necessarily for those long mining trips where you're bringing back stacks of resources for a build or something.
Yeah, so a lot of my exploration has been looking for things that I know I'm going to need. For example, we took some time to look around and finally found a bee's nest, marked the coordinates because I don't have silk touch yet, but obviously I want access to honey and wax so that I can wax copper and build with it and have it stop or keep it at a specific point in oxidation so I can do some creative builds with it in that way. Still haven't found a geode, like I mentioned, so that kind of is what I'm most excited about, because I again, in the snapshot, I'm not playing with Optifine, and so I think I'm really going to get some use out of the spyglass. And I'd like to try and get it before Optifine and this is released, so I'd like to try and play with it, because I know that once 117 is available and Optifine catches up, I will more than likely just be using Optifine as opposed to relying on the spyglass. So I want to try to play with it, in the meantime. The only other thing that I noticed and will comment on with the snapshot, I don't play with the World Gen data pack for all the reasons that you mentioned, because between you and several other creators I follow, including my own experience a couple weeks ago, it just seems too buggy to bother with. It's not a pleasant playing experience. And in that light, I accidentally, in searching for a slime that I heard bouncing around and appeared to be stuck in a small cave, I thought, oh, if I can figure out where they are and know where they probably spawned and can't get away from, I could probably locate a slime chunk and start, having some slime in the game, which would be great. In the process of trying to listen, I didn't turn on closed captioning. So I was listening with headphones and trying to figure out which direction this was going. I ended up making my own spaghetti cave. And I can say between that and watching a couple of videos, I can't say that I'm looking for a claustrophobic Minecraft experience. It doesn't upset me. I am a bit claustrophobic in real life. I think it just comes from being a bigger guy. But it doesn't make me panic. I just feel uncomfortable. And I find in Minecraft, it just, for me, visually becomes an unenjoyable visual experience of like trying to walk around blocks. Everything is only a meter away. You just kind of feel like you're playing pinball as you're going through these caves. And so I had inadvertently made one of my own and just thought like, nope, I don't want this. I don't want to try and explore one of these in Minecraft, because I can see myself finding a noodle cave or a spaghetti cave in the new snapshot or the new world and being like, oh, that's nice, and just like ignoring it because it's like it just looks like too much work, to try to go down and navigate.
Yeah, like I didn't really go looking for spaghetti caves, and I think they're they're one of those things that suffers from being cool to look at on the outside, but doesn't really lend a whole lot to the caving experience that we didn't have already. I think caverns and the cheese cave way of generating caves has been like a lot more of a dramatic and obvious shift from the caves that we are used to from 1.16 and earlier. And I think the spaghetti caves, while they are maybe adding a bit of variation to the overall experience, by themselves don't really have a whole lot of appeal. It's the kind of thing that, yeah, they're good as connecting tissue for some of the other larger cave systems and adds a much more variety to the underground, which, you know, is good in the grand scheme of things. It's better to have more than less, I think, in this case, but I don't really see them as something to seek out in particular in the way that the caverns will be. It's something that you can just kind of move on from, a seamless part of the experience, really. So, yeah, I haven't really, like I said, played around much in the 1.17 snapshot. I gave the data pack a try just to look around for more veins of material, because that was the thing that interested me the most about how the mining experience is going to change in the second half of Caves and Cliffs. And I found a copper vein very easily on the first world I tried, which was the only world I tried. And I was looking for copper initially just so I could talk a little bit more about it, and I didn't end up getting fortune, but I still ended up getting a whole lot of copper, especially once I found that vein. There are still abundant patches of it in early caves. It's about as frequent or more frequent than we used to find iron before the ore distribution changed. And so I still think it's a good thing that we're getting that much copper, because if you intend to build with it, you need that stuff to be abundant. And the fact that it has more drops is a really nice balancing change for the recipe reverting. And I've seen some interesting discussions about whether copper crafting should be consistent with the recipe for precious resource blocks like iron and gold, which have a variety of other uses, or the decorative blocks like quartz and purpur, which are typically a 2x2 crafting recipe, because it's more of a decorative block itself. It doesn't really have much use as a block or really that many uses as an ingot right now. Where do you fall on that debate? Do you think the 3x3 recipe suits it better because it's consistent with the metals of the game already, or do you think it just makes more sense as a decorative block?
I think it makes more sense as a decorative block. I think with iron, which we mentioned last week, you have so many more uses for it.
Yeah.
That you're going to want more of it, and being able to compact more of it into iron blocks. I think that's a balanced way to present those textures. But with copper, specifically the copper textures, when you get into cut copper, it looks very similar to purpur, right?
Yeah.
It has that 2x2 grid to it. It doesn't look like a stone brick. It has a very distinct kind of look to it. So intuitively, it makes sense to put 4 copper blocks in a square in a crafting grid, and then you end up with the cut copper, right? Like that's the kind of thing that you would think you would have. So when it comes to building a copper block, like I don't. I mean, again, I'm of that camp where I'm not a big fan of the block, so I'm probably a little bit jaded on like my opinion of whether I'm going to be building with it or not. But I'm going to be building with it a lot less now that it takes 9 to build a block as opposed to 4.
Yeah.
And this is all coming from how much I have in the world right now, without any kind of enchantments on my pickaxe. That might change if my natural copper collection, because I find it a lot in the world. Like I stumble upon it way more than you stumble upon iron. Just in this current version of the snapshot, without the world gen changes, I find copper a fair bit. And which is cool, because it has that, like, well, this is a block that I want. It's part of the 1.17 snapshot, so like, let's collect it. And so I'm not going specifically on long, like hour-long copper runs, but if I'm exploring a cave and I see some on the wall, I'm going to take it home. And so as a result of mining it without any enchants, I don't have a lot of it. And so I haven't really, I don't really feel like it's going to be something I'm going to be using a lot. So I don't know. I can see the arguments to both sides, I guess.
Yeah, like I definitely fall on the resource block side. I think mainly just because of behavior things. It's a refined metal, first of all, so that's commensurate with the behavior of iron and gold. And I think it being able to be crafted back into copper ingots is kind of part of that as well. You can't uncraft a quartz block back into quartz items, right?
Right.
And same with
Yep.
same with Purpur and Popped Chorus. So I think in terms of like the mechanical implications of it rather than its uses, it makes more sense. And I think even if copper ingots don't have many uses right now, one of the points I was making in my video this week is that it's open to expansion in future or modded uses, and it's going to be useful to uncraft those copper blocks back into something, which a precedent hasn't really been set for crafting a sandstone block back into 4 sand, you know? And so I think it kind of makes more sense from the resource block side of things. The one outlier in that argument is netherwort blocks, which require 9 netherwarts to craft a single block, but then they're so abundant in Crimson Forests now that I don't think anyone really crafts those anymore. So, and that one can't be uncrafted back into netherwort as far as I recall. So I think it's an interesting balance thing, but I think having at least the option to make copper drop more raw copper now that they have the raw items dropping from those ore blocks at least gives them the opportunity to balance things, and that can be open to a little bit more change. We still maybe have the option of deep slate ore dropping slightly more items just to kind of compensate for the challenge required to get it. And yeah, I think at least that side of the game can still see a little bit more rebalancing before the update arrives, or maybe before 1.18 comes along and changes things up. I found it really quite cool finding full blocks of raw copper in the veins, though. Like I liked that as a stumble upon. Like it feels quite rewarding to mine those veins out to begin with, because it's fun to knock down every other block and find, oh, you've got some more copper behind there. Like it feels like all the best parts of going caving condensed into a single hit of ores. And then if you stumble upon the full copper blocks as a result, then that's another, like, it's a heightened reward as a result of that. And it does require a bit of digging around for you to find them. So I do like that as a concept. It gives you more access to that material. And as we've said before, these are materials in the case of copper that you need a lot of, and in case of iron that you need a lot of, and you have to balance it against iron farms and other ways of acquiring the material that might be a little bit easier for technical players. And we didn't talk about this much last time, but I think now that copper requires 9 ingots to craft back into a full block, this kind of puts the pressure on the technical community to either like reconsider the context of drowned farms in getting hold of copper, because the drops from drowned are going to be roughly the same as they are for iron ingots from zombies. You know, it's a relatively low drop chance. So technically speaking, that's a nerf for the more technical side of copper farming, but it maybe also puts some pressure on Mojang to rebuff some of that drowned copper chance, just so maybe we can get copper from a variety of sources more renewably if the blocks are going to be this expensive when the update arrives.
I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things that I discovered and quickly ran away from on my exploration run on the Snapshot playthrough was not only 1, but I believe 4 underwater ruins that were spawning drowns. Someone in my chat mentioned that they sometimes spawn in like little, almost like temple organizations of like 4 in like a little square.
Yeah.
And so a drowned farm with like a villager bait or something in the middle of that could have a decent yield if, the drop rates are such that it ends up being fruitful. I mean, either way, it's copper that you don't have to mine. So if you, depending on how much you're using it, it could end up being something cool. So that's on my list for the Snapshot world. But I was thinking about that and thinking about blocks of raw iron, and I didn't see anything in any of the videos or the notes. But have they done the same thing with iron veins? Do you think they'll put raw blocks of iron in those veins as well?
I believe that is the case. I've not found any myself because I was mainly focusing on copper, and I've found that the raw iron veins are actually much more difficult to come across, and that maybe even more so now that they've adjusted the sizes and the distribution of them. But I do think they are planning on putting raw iron blocks in there as well. So yeah, it's an easy way of getting 9 raw iron at once.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that this potentially introduces is the option for them to have directly smelting raw blocks into full blocks of the material, right? So you put in a block of raw iron, you get an iron block out. And I argued the point in my video that that's potentially a little unbalanced because of the way fuel economy works and the fact that the smelting time for every item is the same. So,
Right.
you could be smelting 9 iron in the time it takes to smelt 1. But people have since pointed out to me that there is a smelting time data value behind the scenes that isn't really used in vanilla Minecraft at all, but can be implemented in data packs. So if anybody wanted to include a data pack that had, a direct conversion from the raw iron block to the full iron block or any of the other raw blocks, then you could potentially slow down the smelting time to balance that. It's still going to take the same amount of fuel, but it will basically lengthen the time. So it could be, maybe in the case of it being 1 ingot time less, I think would be a good way of doing it. So you smelt it for the time it would take to smelt 8 ingots, but you get 9. And so it feels a little bit more balanced that way, like using a coal block to smelt 80 items instead of using 8 coal to smelt 64.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
What do you say we move on to chunk mail, though?
Sounds like a plan. And if you, dear listener, would like to email the show, you can use the email address spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. First email comes from Gundar H. Stryker, a landscape artist member of our Discord. Idea for mob transportation. Hi, Pix and Joel. I was listening to a recent episode of the show, and Joel made a comment about how he would like to be able to have mobsicles in the game. These would be a frozen, harmless version of mobs. This idea got me thinking, what if you could freeze any mob in the game, mine it with a pickaxe, and throw it in your inventory, like a block? This would make for incredibly Minecrafty and a very useful mob transportation, allowing players to carry a village or villager on their shoulders. Each mobsicle would take up a whole slot inventory, not stacking at all. Once you reach the general place where you want them to be at, a campfire or some kind of special source of light or fire would be used to thaw out said mob. One might think this would be quite OP, but obtaining powdered snow, setting up a hole for said mob to cryonize would be a lengthy process as laying down Minecraft rails, in my humble opinion. This is just an idea for a solution to the difficulty of transporting mobs over thousands of blocks. I hope you find this idea interesting. Keep on chunkin', Gundar H. Stryker. Mobsicles are bust. I'm biased. This is my idea, but I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of examples of this that I've seen both in Minecraft and Minecraft adjacent media. So PixArk had a similar system to this, the kind of pixel art sort of blocky Ark Survival Evolved spin-off, where you could turn tamed dinosaurs into cubes, which still weighed a lot, and player inventory had a weight limit. There's like an encumbrance mechanic, so you couldn't just carry a ton of pocket dinosaurs around at once and have your own like Pokemon team with them. But there was even a gumball machine style contraption you could store them in, and it looked like a vending machine for your dinosaurs, which was pretty fun. And that in particular helped with getting them out of tight areas. Like if you had a parasaur that had just like stumbled into a ravine and you couldn't get it back out by riding it, then you could just turn it into a block and jump on out of there yourself. So yeah, there are definitely some games that have a mechanic like this. And Minecraft really has it already in the form of spawn eggs, the difference being we don't have access to those in survival. And there are mechanical implications to spawn eggs. If you right-click on a spawner holding one, then it turns it into that kind of spawner. There are a few other examples I can think of this. We're currently playing, me and Zloy XP again, playing a chicken-blocked map, which is kind of Skyblock, where chickens provide resources for you, much like the chickens mod does for Java Skyblock packs. And that uses a similar mechanic where you get a chicken net, and it's effectively a tool where if you swipe at them with the net, then they turn into basically like a little tablet of that chicken, and then you can use that like a spawn egg, but it doesn't give the player access to vanilla spawn eggs themselves. And so I've seen the mechanic in play. I think the thing is, in terms of balancing it against other forms of mob transport, like minecart rails, for example, I think the problem there is that minecart rail requires you to do a couple of things in terms of effort. You know, you're picking up a ton of rails, you're placing them the entire way, you've got to power some of them probably, and they've got to cover all of the distance. Whereas just like tucking something into a spot of your inventory seems like overpowered from the sense of, it being, the amount of effort you put in versus the reward you get from bringing, villagers thousands of blocks back to your base, or, bringing a creeper with you that you can put into an exhibit, like in the museum that I'm building, for example. I think there's a certain amount of this mechanic that makes things perhaps a little too easy. But I do like the idea of including more freezing mechanics, and I think Powder Snow seems like a cool option for that, with the exception that Powder Snow already has the mechanic of turning skeletons into strays. So maybe there'd be a combination of materials that would allow you to freeze mobs in that same way.
One of the things that I get out of this is just, beyond the fun of it, like thawing out cubes of villagers just for whatever reason makes me very giddy. And I like that idea, with a campfire, and perhaps even having a restriction where you'd have to then have that block of a villager be directly next to a campfire, in the same way that a coral block has to be next to water in order to not turn gray. It would be, something that would restrict the fact that you could only defrost 4 blocks at a time. One of the most challenging things about moving villages or other mobs around is that while you're trying to do that, they generally have a life of their own, and they're trying to walk and do all kinds of different things. And if you can, they're also vulnerable. So zombies can attack villagers. Animals can be attacked from different things. It would be neat if there was maybe a combination where you could freeze the mob in a mobsicle, and then use a minecart to make it travel along the way, instead of using like a water system or something to travel, to move items. You could use a minecart. So it might give a little bit more uses to minecarts. And again, I just think it would be very funny to see villager popsicles going along in minecart rails, for whatever reason, even if it's just for fun. So technically, yes, it'd be better if you're doing a mob farm. It would be better to kill the mobs on site and put the drops into, a shulker box and have that go down a waterway. Like, you're going to move way more items, but it's not as cool as seeing a villager popsicle travel by on a minecart rail. I just, there might be some ways. I think one of the things that struck me just as appealing to this is that by freezing any mob in order to move it, what you eliminate is one of the most annoying things about trying to do that, is the fact that they're always just kind of like randomly pathing in their own direction or away from you. They're going somewhere where you don't want them to be. I had a dog that I was trying to get back to my home base early on in the Dartmouth Meadows drown because it went under the edge of a river that had an overhang and it couldn't figure out how to get out. And had I just been able to freeze him and drag him along as an ice cube, it would have worked a lot better.
Like, if I'd cryogenically frozen this dog, then maybe. Yeah, I do like the idea in principle, and I think it'd be really funny the variety you could get out of it. Like, imagine freezing a Ravager or something like that in a giant block of ice. And that made me think, what if people have been asking for, like, more bosses in Minecraft for a while, and the usual refrain is that, like, the Ender Dragon works for the end, the Wither is technically a Nether themed boss, drops a Nether star, and you get all the materials from it from the Nether, even if you don't necessarily want to fight it in the Nether. And the Overworld doesn't really have bosses as an option, because stumbling into them while you were just casually exploring a world might be something of a difficult challenge and dissuade you from exploring further. But what if, taking this idea to another place, what if there was like a mammoth type of boss? Mammoth's probably a bad example because, of the recent emphasis on conservation of endangered species. But what if there is like a giant frozen monster in like some of the accidental ice caves that we found in mountains, or frozen in frozen ocean iceberg? Like, bring it back to Avatar: The Last Airbender from our pre-show discussion. Like, what if they found like a giant thing frozen in an iceberg the way they start out in Avatar, and then you have to physically, like, the player has to interact and thaw it out in order to fight it. And maybe there are other mobs trapped in there as well, or maybe this, like, ancient prehistoric creature can come out of the iceberg, and then once you've fought it, then you get the reward of a drop item or whatever it happens to be. I wonder if that part of the idea might have legs in terms of introducing mechanics like that in order to get an overworld boss into the picture a little.
And the parallel that I see with all that is just the time investment to thaw or melt something. And it's very similar to the time it takes for something like copper to oxidize as a parallel. Like they've introduced this kind of like new mechanic with copper where it slowly changes over time, and that kind of a thing could be implemented with ice. Like it slowly changes over time depending on whether you're freezing something or whether you're thawing something.
Yeah, it could well do. And yeah, there's certainly like ideas for expanding snow biomes here as well, because I think snow biomes are one of the more criminally underrated biomes in the game. I think it's really fun to play around with it. The snow blocks have layers and so forth. I think there's a lot that could be said for snow biomes if they had more inviting mechanics like this. So yeah, I do wonder if that's an option for Minecraft's future. Let's move on to our next subject, though, because this kind of ties in with the discussion we wanted to have today. This next email comes in from Tim O, and the subject is armor uses for copper. Hi, Johnny and Joel. Was watching Johnny's video about copper in the latest Snapshot and wanted to share my idea for a use for copper and see what you thought. What if you could combine a copper ingot with a piece of leather armor in a smithing table to create reinforced leather armor? This would be stronger than regular leather armor, maybe about the same as iron, and would also keep the ability to protect you from powdered snow and to be dyed like leather. I would like this for two reasons. First, in the early game, iron now seems harder to get, so this would be another way to get reasonable quality armor before going to the more dangerous deep slate levels. Second, I like being able to dye leather armor in different colors, but I never use that because we pass leather's usefulness so early in the game. Iron level protection and durability seem reasonable to live with if I could make it my own colored uniform to match my shield and my banners. Players spend a lot of time making custom skins, but then we all just end up wearing the same diamond or netherite armor which covers them up. I'd really like it if there was some way to alter the appearance of armor slightly without changing the stats. Maybe adding a gold nugget to iron armor in the smithing table to get a gold inlay effect, or maybe add a piece of leather to your gold armor to give it tassels. I'd love to hear your opinions. Stay protected, Tim. A good message there at the end. Thank you, Tim, for the email. Yeah, I really still want augmented or customized armor to be a thing. So I'd be cool with copper being used for that. I think that's a solid suggestion. I think it has... You still end up with the power balance issue of almost everybody wanting the most powerful thing. So eventually everyone's going to end up with diamond or netherite or whatever. But I think we've kind of laid down the law on this before and said we would be really happy with any kind of cosmetic additions to armor to make... individuals feel a little bit more unique from each other.
Yeah, I can see the argument from Mojang wanting, for PvP reasons, that armor be immediately identifiable from a distance, saying like, that's diamond, that's iron, that's leather. I know who's the weakest among those three players. But I play mostly in iron. It's a little bit of an extra challenge for me. I don't like the look of the blue diamond armor, and I've just not taken the time to change the armor texture to be something that looks cool. And it wouldn't matter because everybody else in the server, unless they had my texture pack, they'd still see me as a bright blue smurf. So I'd be happy to sacrifice diamond or netherite protection for some customization. I say that, and I am currently a hobo hodgepodge of gold helmet, elytra, iron pants, and netherite boots. Because my boots are things I don't want to wear out very quickly, so having netherite boots makes the most sense. I love the idea, and I'll get into a little bit more detail of this in our main discussion, of having some sort of dyeable element in the armor. So if it's a stripe, or if it's a centerpiece, or if it's a crest, or if it's, especially if it's something you can control, in the same way that you can put like a creeper face on a banner, it'd be very neat to be able to put something in the middle of your iron armor and change the color of that. So maybe you don't get to have, an entire pink set of armor, but you maybe have a heart or a flower or something in the middle that you like. Or maybe you could put, like a wither skull or something on the front of it for something more aggressive, and have that be black, in the middle of your chest. And again, immediately identifiable still as iron armor, but, has a colored personal thing in the middle. I like that idea. I don't know about having armor like leather armor reinforced with copper to the point where it's the same as iron, because I feel like that kind of is like a make easy button, and we'll get more into this in a minute, but I feel like maybe something in between would be better, something to last the player in between leather and iron rather than being equal to iron.
Yeah, I think the reason we don't have an in-between stage right now is to encourage more people to use leather armor to begin with. And I think in making iron deliberately harder to get hold of, I do think they've kind of brought up the fact that, hey, leather armor is still a thing, which adding copper armor into the mix would negate a little bit. But I think what Tim's idea does is bring in similar mechanics to what you're using a smithing table for when you're turning diamond into netherite. You still need the leather armor in order to augment it with copper, in the same way that you still need to acquire diamond armor before skipping straight to netherite. I think there is definitely an advantage to encouraging players to use some of those lesser used items for right now, so that they can, have the opportunity to keep it moving forward, and like the upgrade process instead of a replacement process is something that appeals to me, and I would like to see used a little more in the game. Let's fold this straight into our main discussion, though, because we were talking about having a discussion about the place of copper tools and copper armor, because that is the logical conclusion everyone assumes is going to happen whenever a new metal gets added to the game. But we find copper tools and copper armor absent from Mojang's plans. And we wanted to go over a little bit of why we think that would be the case, and if we can see a space for copper tools and copper armor in future, or if we think Mojang should maybe revise their ideas of what they think copper tools and armor could do in the game.
And I think this falls back on my earlier comment about seeing both sides of the argument for changing the way that copper is crafted into copper blocks. Because you have an ingot, and 9x9 into a copper block makes sense. That's the same as iron. But you can also make an iron pick, iron sword, iron shovel, iron axe with an ingot. And so you get a copper ingot, and you get excited, and you go, oh, I can't do anything else with this. And so it's a little confusing. And I can see a space for copper armor, like Tim mentioned, in between leather and iron, but upon some embarrassing research, I didn't know this already, we already have one. We have two. Gold and chainmail fall specifically between the protection level of leather and iron. So we have it, people just don't use it because gold, the durability is garbage. And the amount of effort, I think, put into chainmail, you can't craft it, right? Like, you have to find it.
Yeah, you have to either find chainmail, you get it from mobs, you can trade it from villagers. Occasionally, I think it might turn up in loot chests, although I don't know exactly where. And chainmail has never been craftable, I think, because of the contention on what its crafting recipe would be. People thought that a lot of the time that, when iron bars were introduced, maybe those could be used in a crafting recipe, but that feels kind of awkward because you're putting in 6 iron and you get 16 iron bars out, because that works the same as the crafting recipe for glass. And so that feels like a cheaper way of making armor that is almost as good as iron, so it may as well do if you're putting 6 iron ingots in and you get out nearly enough for a full suit of armor. I think the same is true of iron nuggets, right? You get 9 nuggets out of an ingot, but if you're using 9 nuggets or 8 nuggets to make a chainmail chest plate, then that is suddenly a shift in the resource economy. And yeah, I don't know where copper would really go, because it's a pretty soft metal, right? It's the kind of thing that we see being roughly the same as gold. So I think it'd be the kind of thing that, yes, it'd be easy to acquire and build tools and armor from, but it is likely to be as trashy in terms of durability as gold is. And I think one of the main things about tools, the main thing I'm going to disregard tools for the majority of this conversation, at least the conventional tools that we used to, pickaxes and axes and so forth, is that unless you add in new materials or you change up the current tool progression, there is nothing copper could mine that other tools couldn't. The only reason to have an iron pickaxe, aside from an extra hit of durability, is so that you can mine diamonds. And that's diamonds and redstone, and maybe gold, I think. But everything else can be mined with a stone pickaxe until you get to diamonds to get obsidian, and that's really, really it. And so I really think unless they added something new that copper had to be used to mine, maybe because you could make a copper pickaxe more delicate or something, and so you could harvest a material without just breaking it in half or something, then there's nothing really that copper could do without just kind of messing up the current tool progression. I think to make copper desirable, the tools have to be new tools. And the spyglass is an example of that, right? It's something that you can't
Right.
make. You can't make an iron spyglass.
Yeah.
And I think maybe something for the archaeology brush might be planned or something like that. And maybe if we want to expand into other mechanics in future, you could use copper to make a hammer or a chisel or something like that. And regardless of what those things did, I can imagine copper being the specialist tools kind of tier, whereas wood and stone and then iron and diamond end up being like the workhorse ones, the ones that are getting you the majority of the heftier resources. I don't really see copper having a place in that unless it has some kind of native enchantment, at which point, yeah, it's an advantage for 2 seconds, and then you get an enchantment table and you're like, oh yeah, no, this is just where I'm going to be at from now on. I don't think that copper tools really have a place in the progression long term, and we don't need more stuff just kind of cluttering up the mid-game, I think, at this stage. As far as tools go, at least.
Yeah, the way that my brain was going is that way as well. Something that Tim mentioned with like the idea of decorating armor and like putting in like gold leaf or something like that.
Yes.
The idea of something like a jeweler's hammer where you want the hammer to be able to do the job, but you don't want it to necessarily damage the precious emerald or gold or whatever it is that you're putting into your armor would make a little bit of sense. And if that would be the only way to then decorate armor and you'd have to use a copper hammer, then hey, that gives a unique tool, something you're not going to need all the time, but in the same way that you don't need a flint and steel all the time. It's still a nifty thing to have in Minecraft, for when you need it. And I think that could be really fun to explore. And would make sense, like has that touch of logic to it that kind of goes there. The place where I see a gap, especially with the way that iron and diamond are being redistributed in the new world generation, is between iron and diamond. There's a much larger gap between iron and diamond than there is between leather and iron in terms of availability and protection. And this would involve, probably something like an alloy, which we only ever see in mods. So bronze, and it would also cross over into like just bronze tools and bronze armor would be a great thing for Minecraft education in terms of, where that happened in history, where that falls in terms of hardness and usefulness and what things were made out of bronze versus why copper isn't used specifically because it's so soft. But that gets into a whole other, like, well, then you've got a third metal added to the game or a fourth one. So like that kind of stuff goes in a rabbit hole we maybe don't want to go down.
Yeah, and then you get into things like alloys and so forth potentially.
Yeah, exactly. But one thing I did think about was that in some other places where some mods that do make sense and do feel kind of Minecrafty are things like cooking mods, and copper conducts heat. In the same way that we were talking about the way that copper conducts electricity, having copper pots, which is a common thing in modern day, having copper pots for cooking specifically, instead of, cauldrons have been kind of like pushed to the point where they're kind of more leather working, like they have that kind of a thing going on right now. And so having a specific thing that you could use to make your rabbit stew, to make different things in Minecraft, to cook different things in Minecraft, that could be kind of cool. And if copper pot, in the same way that you make a cauldron, maybe it costs the same, then that would be cool, I think. And if it's got the right kind of texture, could potentially be a good decorative block for people. I use cauldrons at the bottom of pillars all the time. And it works out quite well. So like that kind of stuff could be really cool. I also thought about things like a watering can. Now this was less practical and more just like where my brain goes when I think about what copper things exist. Gardening tools, trowels, and things like a watering can are also kind of classic copper tools. It's redundant. I know. I get that you can saturate farmland with a single water source in the middle of 9 blocks. And there's all that kind of stuff where like, well, it really wouldn't have any use, at least not right now that we can imagine. But if there was a way to use a watering can to constantly water something, to control water somehow, to if there was ever anything in Minecraft that did not need a lot of water, but would thrive with only a little bit, that kind of stuff would be cool. But then again, like we've got bone meal, so if you want to grow your crops, if you want to grow your potatoes and your wheat and things, you just hit them with the bone meal and away you go. So like it's a redundant idea, but that's kind of where my brain went.
Yeah, I think if copper is going to have any kind of uses for tools, it's either going to be something along those lines, something kind of domestic and quality of life sort of style things, or it's going to be something that comes completely out of left field and is often it's going to be more tied in with some future ideas they might have. like, you know, the changes to wool and how that affects stuff like skulk sensors. You know, like I think we're going to find interactions between these items that we couldn't have predicted because we didn't necessarily know what was coming in terms of mob additions and various other bits and pieces. But I mean, going back to the copper armor idea, I think armor is an easier sell than tools, because
yes,
it's not gonna, you know, armor is not typically something that eats up durability. You know, the durability on armor is nowhere near what it is for tools because you're not taking damage all the time, whereas a lot of the time you are breaking blocks. So I think copper armor has the potential to last longer than copper tools and therefore be a bit useful. Like, I don't know about you, but when I've got a gold helmet, even if I don't have mending on it or unbreaking, it tends to last a little while for my early trips to the nether before I really need to worry about replacing it. And I think the same would maybe be true for copper. It's also a more visually striking change because, you know, wearing a full suit of copper armor, I think would like be more visible to the player than if you were, you know, whatever other kind of armor you were wearing. And regardless of how much protection it gave you, I think it would be, you know, a little bit more visually appealing than just having copper tools from a kind of, you know, aesthetic perspective. You could also, if it was possible to do this, factor copper erosion into armor, maybe based on time worn, or if it's left out on an armor stand, maybe the same thing could apply, where eventually you end up with some pretty neat looking armor because it feels like it's aged and has been, you know, through a few battles, and it'll be the first time that armor would really look kind of, you know, dented and weathered by its constant use. I was thinking that even if oxidized copper armor, you know, you enchant that and it could kind of pass for diamond. Like, if you compare the texture of diamond armor unenchanted to oxidized copper, there's a little bit more of the kind of greenish tint to the copper, of course, but it's not that far removed that at a distance, you know, you might be able to fool somebody in a PvP contest. And I don't think that's necessarily a consideration too many people make on the fly, but it'd be pretty funny wearing an aged suit of copper armor and, you know, faking everybody into thinking you had diamond. So I do think that maybe copper armor, if anything, might have a place, but then if it's going to be used for armor, then the why not tools argument gets thrown in there as well. So yeah, I do wonder if there is room for it. I think an augmentation mechanic, a kind of enhancement or upgrade mechanic, like Tim's email suggested, might make more sense overall. And maybe if copper is destined for that kind of path, then they can consider making it a little bit more interesting than just crafting a suit of copper armor.
Do we know if copper has any effect on the note block? Like, does it make a different sound coming to the note block? They would have announced that, I think.
I don't believe it does yet, and there's still room for stuff like that. I think the one thing that we are maybe still waiting on for 1.17, before, of course, we kind of shift our focus to the second half of the update, is things like you know, note block changes, little stuff like that, and then advancements is the other thing. You were talking earlier about some of that stuff not really being signposted. I think maybe acquiring a moss block or acquiring some copper or something is maybe going to have a little bit more added to the kind of game-led objectives side of things, so that advancements can maybe signpost some of that stuff. And
that really points out a missing link in my gameplay. I never think about advancements, and in the Snapshot playthrough, I should really bring that up more often and just kind of see what might be there, because I forget that is even a thing most of the time.
Yeah, it's a great way of setting yourself goals if you're at a loose end and you're either, like, you haven't got enough materials for a build project, but you're holding out for that in particular. You think, what can I do in the meantime? And obviously I've been thinking about advancements a lot because of doing stuff with Clash of the Creators and everything, but yeah, I think it's going to be fun to see if they add in some advancements that are really going to direct players to some of the newer content, and at least let people know what's possible once you get hold of a moss block or dripstone or anything like that.
One thing that made me think about sound was the unique sound that copper has. I noticed it this weekend when we were placing some copper blocks down in the world. It has a really cool kind of like metallic hollow kind of thing to it. And that could be something that would be a neat tell on that difference between diamond armor and maybe enchanted copper armor would be if instead of the classic kind of like crunch hit noise, in that if you're in a PvP situation and someone hits you, or even if a skeleton beans you with an arrow, it would be really neat if the different armors in Minecraft had different sounds. So maybe you hear a smack if you're wearing leather armor, or a slightly more metallic thunk if you're wearing gold, a bong if you're wearing, copper armor, kind of like a bell.
Yeah.
Iron could be more like a clang or a clack, and then I don't know what you could do for diamonds, some sort of like maybe high pitched, like almost like what Amethyst does, like that kind of like almost like a song,
Yeah, the kind of ting,
then,
sort of, yeah.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. It could be fun.
I'm now imagining Mojang's sound designers getting some actual diamonds into a booth and just hitting them with various things to see what kind of noises they make. It's got to be authentic. They recorded real-life goats and pandas and everything, so there you go. You never know. I think that's where we're going to wrap up this episode of The Spawn Chunks for today, folks. Thank you so much for listening. You can find more information about the show and links to some of the stuff we've talked about today at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show was composed by me, and The Spawn Chunks is proud as ever to be a listener-supported podcast. As Joel mentioned at the top of the show, people who get some value out of the show have been putting some value back in for a few years now. And if you are one of those people, you can visit patreon.com/thespawnchunks to join our community. Pledging at any level gets you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat. You get to listen to the show live when we record it every week, and it also gets us closer to our next goal, which is still the monthly Minecraft audio hangout, where we can sit down with everybody and we can just have a nice discussion about what we've all been doing in Minecraft, like the quick login, but for the community. We're currently at 247 patrons, which is down 3 from last week, likely just because Patreon does its usual readjustment at the beginning of each month. But special thanks go out to our content engineers this week: General Patton 82, Greener Canuck, Hunter 555, Jumbo Sale, and Yitz. Thank you for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. Just point them towards the Spawn Chunks on Twitter or Instagram. And a personal recommendation is another way to share the podcast. Just poke a friend in the arm from a safe distance during the pandemic and tell them about the show, where they can go to listen to it. That includes iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and YouTube, really wherever you can find a podcast. Email the show at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. The RSS feed is linked on the spawnchunks.com, and the patron-only RSS feed is on the Patreon page, and that's where you can get an automatic download of the Render Distance, the extended version of the podcast.
My name is Johnny, but online I go by Pixelriffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/Pixelriffs, where I attempt to make sense of this crazy and wonderful game in a series called the Minecraft Survival Guide. I stream 3 days a week on Twitch, where I'm doing behind-the-scenes work for the Survival Guide, and I'm also the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, which you can find through a quick YouTube search. Aside from that, I'm at Pixelriffs on both Twitter and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
Everything I'm doing online, including my illustration and design portfolios, at joelduggan.com. My other podcast about sci-fi and fantasy entertainment turned 400 this week. You can find that at thecitadelcafe.com. We talked about The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, as well as Invincible, a new animated series on Amazon. You can follow me at Joel Duggan on social media and at Joel Duggan on Twitch, where I am playing the latest Snapshot every week, maybe even twice a week, and building a detailed medieval town in the Citadel.
Thanks for visiting the Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite. Who's up for spaghetti?